Hello, and welcome back to the Exchange Podcast. It's been a very exciting week. As always, stuff going on, and as always, we are glad to be back here. And all of those that are listening, thank you for joining us on X, used to be Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Audience is growing. That's always a good sign. Love to see new people listen. We call ourselves the Exchange Podcast because we want you to come and talk with us and exchange your thoughts, ideas, and opinions. You will not be shamed here, and you will not be talked down to. We just might disagree, but that's okay. Michael, how's it been?
It's been going. I'm excited to be back, ready to have some interaction, hopefully bring some knowledge to some people.
Well, first off, I want to say happy Mother's Day to all of our mothers out there and new mothers and mothers to be, and as well as those that have been mothers for a while. This weekend is Mother's Day, and that brings me to something. Been a lot of talk in the news here lately. We were talking about it before going on the podcast. And it's about if Israel goes into Rafah, that the U.S. Biden has said that he will cut off funding. And I know people say, well, why is that significant? Maybe he's trying to stop World War III. It's very significant to the United States, very significant. And there's a few things I want to talk about, but since this is Mother's Day weekend, one of the things that I want to talk about is a mother of one of our presidents. He was our 37th president. He was president from 1969 to 1974. That was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, I know when I say that name, a lot of people automatically want to go to, but Watergate, he lied. He did. He
was also the most, he received the most votes. He was the most popular president in U.S. history.
Yeah, he was. Absolutely, he was. And the thing is, not everything he did was bad. I don't think I agree with taking us off the gold standard.
He was also set up by the CIA.
Well, and that's kind of one of the things I want to get into because there was an article I came across by Rabbi Daniel Lapin. The title of it is called A Mother's Message, and it is about Hannah Nixon, Richard Nixon's mother, and it was foreign policy advice that she gave him even when he was a kid. And of course, this rabbi is talking about practical parenting. And if you don't think that being a mother is important, because we talked about last week the trad wife or the traditional wives, if you don't think that that's important to your kid's life and your kid's future, you need to read a few articles such as this right here. And I'm going to read this. It's not a very long article, but I want to start it off. This rabbi writes, and so what I'm going to say here is I'm quoting him. And so understand, this is not me saying, so if it sounds like I'm saying something in third person or something strange, this is not me. This is not nothing I wrote. This is coming from an article. It says it all comes back to mothers, doesn't it? In a poem published 20 years before the birth of Hannah Milhouse Nixon, poet William Ross Wallace wrote these words: "For the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world." Yes, he might well have been talking of President Richard Nixon's mother. He goes on to say, he says, "I have been watching a series online called Against All Odds. Israel Survives. While I find the premise of the series a bit silly, a reporter who is searching to find out whether miracles are real, each 27-minute episode highlights a fascinating piece of Israel's history. The segment featuring the Yom Kippur War of 1973 included an amazing snippet. In 1973, Israel was unprepared when Egypt and Syria both launched massive attacks. 1,400 Syrian tanks faced 189 Israeli tanks in the northern, and similar imbalances loomed on the southern Egyptian front. Looking at it rationally, the country's chance for survival seemed hopeless. In desperation, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir phoned President Nixon's private line in the middle of the night. She made an anguished plea for American support in form of armaments. Acceding to this plea would mean ignoring the recommendation of the Cabinet and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. On the episode, I was watching a documentary producer recalls President Nixon saying, and this is, I've heard this quote. And so as I was doing the show prep, I looked it up because I've heard my dad say it, and I've heard different people that remember his administration, him saying this. But he says this about his mother. I could almost hear my mother's voice. She would tell me stories and read to me from the Old Testament, the heroes of the Bible. And one afternoon she said, Richard, someday you're going to be in a position where you can help save the Jewish people. And when that day comes, you must do everything in your power. On that day, President Nixon, via his mother's training decades earlier, became God's angel. Remember the story when the culture urges you to do something important rather than spending quantity time with your children transmitting your values and beliefs. Remember the story. It goes back to the trad wife, right? So here's a mother who's raising her kid. She's read the Bible. She believes the Bible. She's reading to her son the biblical stories. And for whatever reason, she knew he was going to be in a position one day to help Israel. She didn't know it was going to be the Yom Kippur War. She didn't know that this was going to be when Israel was going to be attacked. And we're in that was 73. So 50, what is this now? 51 years later. I mean, it's almost history repeating itself. Other than we have a president now who is saying that he will not, that he's considering not sending the armaments, not sending the money, as we always have, to our allies Israel. And so there's a big significance.
Yeah, well, they had already stopped a shipment of munitions because of they're stating that Israel may or may not have committed international crimes with U.S. munitions.
Have they said what those crimes are?
Well, no. And then the problem that they have is they said, well, we can't prove that they used U.S. munitions, but the Biden administration is using that as leeway to stop funding and military support.
So we go back, right? And you mentioning, the CIA basically being the ones that would remove Richard Nixon. And one of the things that we find, and George W. Bush found this out with the weapons of mass destruction. Donald Trump found this out. Probably the one community in our government you do not want to be on the list of people that they want to remove, and that is the intelligence community, because they can feed you false intelligence just as well as they can feed you correct intelligence. And when you look throughout the history of our nation since the founding of the CIA, this is why that our country should have never had. I mean, we're hearing now so much about, we need to have the FBI completely ripped out and replaced. This is why that we should have never had a national police. Now, when I say that, George Washington was the man who founded the U.S. Marshals. We should have left our national police force at that level. Okay. I understand why we needed them, but every time something happens, we need more oversight for our oversight. And that's all the CIA was, really. The CIA was this world police force. And so it really goes back to the Roman era of the barrack sergeants, when they would decide it was time for a Caesar or an emperor to go. Of course, they would physically kill the man. They don't do this. They don't physically. I know. I can already hear the
I don't know, Kennedy might.
That's what I was getting ready to say. I can already hear well, what about John F. Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln? Okay, look, we can go down that road, but at the same time, they're not doing what the barrack sergeants did in Rome. I mean, those guys were openly and belligerently killing people. But this goes back even further than that.
Well, I was going to say, nowadays they don't even have to kill you. All they've got to do is kill your character.
That's right. That's right. And I'm going to talk about a president who that happened to. Again, this is 200 years ago. John Adams promoted a Jewish state in the Holy Land. It says Donald Trump is the latest United States president to be cast as a Christian Zionist. All a Zionist is somebody who supports the right of Israel to exist. That is, if you've ever wondered, if you hear that term, what is a Zionist, or you hear that term, you ask yourself, what is a Zionist? That's what they are. They believe in Israel's right to exist. And the thing with Donald Trump was he really upset everybody when he relocated. He pushed and saw the relocation of the embassy to Jerusalem. That didn't set well. And as you said, if you don't believe that Israel is special to God, just go through history. Look at what Adolf Hitler did. Not just him, but then when an American president supports the right of Israel to exist, that president faces a lot of backlash. I mean, look at what's going on. This whole thing that we're seeing on these college campuses is because of the fact that and one of the reasons why I truly believe that that Biden is saying that he will not give Israel the armaments and the support that we've always given them is because of this backlash.
Yeah, he's capitulating to the far left. It's my opinion that he's just trying to appease them by not allowing Israel to continue the war. He's trying, and I think it's more of a virtue signaling than anything.
You're right.
I don't. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, they're not going to need our munitions. They will. I mean, they're resourceful. They'll find a way. But I think it's more of him making a statement, or whoever his handlers are. We'll put it that way, because I'm not sure he's competent enough. In all reality, I don't think that he's aware enough to make those decisions.
No, I think it's a couple of people. I think it's two people primarily. I think it's Barack Obama and John Podesta. If you don't know who John Podesta is, just go back and read him. John Podesta showed up on the scene, I think, somewhere around the Clinton administration, maybe a little earlier, but I believe that's where he came from. And he has had his hand in administrations since that day. And when Trump was elected in 2016, he showed John Podesta the door. And that's where all of this stuff is coming. He's really the guy that I think has masterminded most of the Steele dossier and things of all of this stuff, especially now. And if you go back, it was maybe, I believe it was Taft who served. I believe it was Taft. He served 4 years. He served a term. He was voted out, and then he went back in 4 years later. I believe it was Taft. Very similar circumstances to what we're seeing now. There was a woman who said that she had that Taft had followed his had fathered a baby out of wedlock, and it was in New York, and she was suing him, and basically the whole thing was, I mean, if you look at how that went, he when he was voted out of office in 1913, I believe it was, he lost by something like 1,000 votes. Excuse me. And I'm trying to get my thoughts here. So he was voted out, and he comes back, and so all of a sudden this lawsuit in New York happens, right? So she says that he fathers the baby out of wedlock, and so it's basically a smear his name, and this is what we're seeing with the whole Stormy Daniels thing, right? Same. I mean, it's so bizarre I don't believe that we live in a matrix, but if anything made me believe we live in a matrix, this kind of stuff is what does it, because I'm going, this is, here we are 100 years later, and we're doing the same thing.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
We're just, history's repeating itself. Almost the exact same scenario based off of what you said.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I'm sorry, it wasn't Taft. It was Grover Cleveland. I wanted to get that name. That was one of the reasons why, because I wanted to make certain I had the right president. It was Grover Cleveland, and so it was exact same circumstances. And so he ends up. I think there was even suspicion of a stolen election when he was president in the 1800s. It was doable that a president could be voted out after, with losing by like a margin of 1,000 votes. When we jump forward to Richard Nixon loses to John F. Kennedy by, I think it was like 1,000 votes per precinct. That was another one that has been highly contested, and pretty much both Democrats and Republicans all agree that election was stolen. Now, we're not talking about the 2020 election. I'm saying that we always know that there are these there are these administrations, there's these elections that some shenanigans go on. And I do think there were shenanigans that went on in 2020.
Well, there's always voter fraud.
Yeah.
I don't care how far back in the elections you go, there will always be some fraud. Yeah. It's just becoming more obvious, and the people perpetrating it haven't gone to the lengths to cover it up that they used to.
So you're right. And so one of the things I want to talk about with John Adams was, it says that the reasoning behind Trump's support of a Jewish homeland, however, differs sharply from the second president's belief system, which was recorded in 1819 with musings to a friend about restoring an independent Jewish nation to Israel. After leaving the White House in 1801, Adams maintained correspondence with Mordecai Emanuel Noah, the most famous American Jew of his era. So he would have been like Benjamin Netanyahu, right? At that time. Now, there wasn't a Jewish state, so he wasn't a prime minister. But he was very heavily involved in politics. He was very much an influencer of that day. It says that of a Sephardic background, Noah wore many hats, including those of diplomat, judge, surveyor, and playwright. What do they call them? They call those guys, what is the name? Renaissance men. It was as a diplomat that Noah's religion played a role. However, evoking the current conversation about disloyal American Jews initiated by President Trump in 1815, Noah was recalled from a posting in Tunis due to official. Now, I want to back up and explain why he called them disloyal Jews. He was not anti-Semitic. He called them disloyal Jews because he's referring to people like Bernie Sanders, who is a Jew, and he does not believe he does not believe that Israel is a state per se. He believes that they only exist there because the United States keeps them alive. He does not believe that that's the same Jewish people. He does not believe that he ascends necessarily from the same Jewish people of the biblical Jews. So that's what he's referring to when he calls them disloyal Jews. In 1815, Noah was recalled from a posting in Tunis due officially to his religion. Noah's Judaism, it was said, formed a bar to the exercise of his consular functions, forcing President James Madison to dismiss him. Rumor has it, however, that also business interests back home were irked by Noah's ransom payments to the pirates who had been terrorizing American merchant ships for so many years. That's the Barbary pirates. Barbary pirates. And they were stealing ships, and we were paying them. It was ridiculous amounts of money in ransom. Which is why we have the no, what is it they call that for terrorism?
Oh gosh, if you hadn't said anything, I can tell you. We do not.
No, we just simply don't negotiate.
Yeah, we don't negotiate with terrorists.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Barbary pirates have been operating for quite a period, and the British have been paying them to not raid their ships, and they wanted America to do the same. Up to the point where we got fed up with it, and they sent the Navy down there and took care of that problem.
Yes, they did, and which is where that song comes from.
You know, and honestly, not much has changed because you look at Somali pirates. I mean, it's the same
Yeah.
thing. Or what's happening with the Houthi rebels, you know, raiding ships. It's all repeating itself.
It definitely is. It definitely is, and it always does. And I don't offhand remember who said it, but the quote that, you know, those who forget history are destined to repeat it, doomed to repeat it. You know, and that's what we're seeing. I mean, because there has been this move, if you will, to rip history out, to not teach it correctly, and therefore you can cause people to forget. I mean, this is why that you even have people who would want to say that the Holocaust never happened. And you know, the same people. Well, I don't want to say the same people. That's unfair. But a lot of people want to say the world is flat. You're going. History bears a different story of that. And so, you know, you get this guy here, and this is what I'm talking about with John Adams. I mean, it says, after commenting on Noah's travels, Adams wrote that his friend should have also visited Syria, Judea, and Jerusalem. I love this. This is where Adams really, you know, I love what he says here. For Adams would have read Noah's accounts of those places with special consideration. From there, Adams lapsed into whimsical thinking. In the Holy Land, mused Adams, Noah could be at the head of 100,000 Israelites and marching with them into Judea and making a conquest of that country and restoring your nation to the dominion of it. For I really wish the Jews again in Judea an independent nation. He's not saying that he wanted the Jews out. He's saying Israel needs to be a nation in their own country. Because a guy like Adams, he, you know, did he know that Hitler was? No, he wasn't. He didn't have a crystal ball, but he knew that sovereignty of any nation. This is why we expanded from border to border. Sovereignty from any nation means stability, and therefore it means preservation of that nation.
Yeah, he kind of saw the writing on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you look at a lot of these men from history, they Nixon or Nixon's mother,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have, like you said, they don't have a crystal ball, but they can look at the current state of the world and realize the potential.
Yes.
And so that's what Adams was seeing, the potential. It just took how many more years to actually make that happen? Because it wasn't until 1948 that they actually became a state again.
It was 1947, wasn't it?
I thought it was 48. Either way.
Yeah, either way. I mean, because that, yeah, and again, let me. So I said that, right? So it goes on. The writer here goes on. He says, taken in isolation, this passage appears to resonate with the goal of creating a Jewish state. The kicker, however, came in the next sentence, and this is Adams writing. I believe that once restored to an independent government and no longer persecuted, the Jews would soon wear away some of the asperities and peculiarities of their character, and possibly in time become liberal Unitarian Christians. For your Jehovah is our Jehovah, and your God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is our God, wrote Adams. Now, that does not sound like a man who doesn't believe in God. That sounds like a man who has read the Bible. He understands the Bible. He understands the promises of God. Those that bless you, I will bless. Those that curse you, I will curse. In other words, Adams supported Jews returning to the Holy Land so they could convert to a Unitarian belief system. This was the system Adams adopted for himself during retirement, a rejection of the Holy Trinity as divine and of his Puritan roots. Now, in exchange with the Times of Israel, historian Jonathan Sarna said Adams' letter to Noah has nothing to do with Zionism. Not entirely true. First of all, the word Zionism did not exist, and Theodore Herzl had not yet been born, said Sarna, director of Schusterman Center for Israel Studies at Brandeis University. Now, No, the word Zionist did not exist. I think
What you know what also didn't exist in the Bible? The term Holy Trinity.
that's right.
It's never found. We still accept it, even though
Well, because the Bible talks about it.
but it wasn't explicitly spelled out. Zionism wasn't a term.
Well, didn't that come? Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't that come around? Didn't the Nazis use that as a slur?
Yes.
So I mean, the word Zionist doesn't come around till almost another 100 years.
Yeah, but the idea is already there.
The idea,
didn't have a term for it.
Yeah, it's
or hadn't coined a term for it.
Well, it's kind of like using the word atheists, right? That's a term that has changed. It has flipped. The term atheist actually came during the Roman Empire. Christians were called atheists because we rejected polytheism for monotheism. And of course, that was something. Monotheism was actually a movement that was being led, or actually, it has started in the old Greek Empire. By the time that the Christianity come around, most of your Roman culture really only served the gods because it was tradition. They didn't really believe in them because if they believed in a god, they believed in which they did. Many of them accepted that Caesar was divine. So I'm not saying that this was they did accept divinity. They did accept God. But like you said, I mean, Zionist was a slang term. Christians was a slang term. But it was one of those things where we started wearing it as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
And Zionist is the same thing.
That's occurred many times throughout history where something that may be derogatory is used against you, and you just accept it and run with it.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, it's because people just simply did not. They just simply did not look at it the same way that we do today. And think about when they call us a Zionist today. Many people that still call us Zionists are still using it in the same way the Nazis did. And so, I mean, when you're looking at all these protests on college campuses, they're calling people Zionists in the effect of, I mean, some of them are even so much as going saying death to Zionists. Very similar, very eerily similar to what was going on in Germany.
Well, they're also using the saying from the river to the sea.
Yeah.
Which, for those listening that aren't aware, so they're saying from the River Jordan to, what is it, the Red Sea there?
Oh, yeah.
They're saying that the Arabs or the Palestinians should have all of that land. They're basically calling for the extermination of all of the people of Israel. And I mean, it's insane to think that they can go around spouting stuff like that, but then anytime you try to defend them or have a rational conversation, somehow you're the one who's not progressive enough or is closed-minded. The irony of that fails, or it escapes them. They have almost completely lost their minds. The ironic thing is they oftentimes will call anyone who differs from their views. They love to throw the term around Nazi, but they are acting far more fanatical than anyone on the opposing side.
Well, what you find is that 9 times out of 10, we've seen this ever since. What we find is that what they are being accused of, or what they are accusing, let me say, of that, they're the ones who are actually guilty of it, and we've seen that on several occasions. And you look at all these different things that are going on. It's like this whole thing with this trial. I mean, everybody is saying that the judge should have recused himself. And we already see that the judge is corrupt. His daughter is like a big contributor. So is he to the Biden administration. we're seeing now that George Soros and many people within the Democrat Party, the DNC, I should say, have funded these uh, uh, the college protests. And what's funny about that is you remember when the election had occurred and Trump had, or it really wasn't Trump, it was the mayor of DC had those protesters. Was it gas canisters they threw at them?
I don't even remember, but
But you remember the situation, though, right?
yes. So the thing is, for anybody who doesn't believe that these are being funded and that they're being organized by people that have nefarious intent, look at the statistics of how many people arrested on college campuses don't actually go to the colleges or have no affiliation with them. They're getting paid and getting bussed in, just like you had with all of the riots, with the BLM movement and everything else. They're being funded and brought in. They're outside agitators. They're not. It's not a quote unquote grassroots movement. It's not just the college campuses. These people are coming from other states. Mm-hmm. And going specifically to those campuses to create issues.
Well, that's and they prove that because when they go and they look at it, they like they're staying in the same kind of tents and they're all across the nation, right? I mean, so it's like these. It's kind of like these tents that you would get from Pfizer. No, what is the company that responds after every FEMA. It'd be something similar to that. I mean, where FEMA sends mobile homes out, they would send these tents to people that are out here doing the protesting, and so that's it's kind of it's kind of like going, guys. I understand the low information voter and the people that would vote the left would absolutely believe that, but by and large, most people that are of average intelligence can look at that stuff and go, something here is not right. And I think we read that last week that I don't remember how many people actually, like how high the percentage is that were not college students.
Yeah, it varied from campus to campus, but in some of them, a majority of the people arrested didn't have any affiliation to the college. And so, I mean, statistically speaking, what are the odds of that? But like I said, going back to last week, I can remember a time where we were sitting waiting for Antifa to show up, and they did show up to some extent in Little Rock, but they were being bussed in. They didn't. Someone was paying for all of that.
Yeah.
Tell me a bunch of unemployed. People who, with these radical beliefs, were all of a sudden banded together and organized it and paid for everything. I failed to believe that.
Well, I mean, there's a scripture that talks about. It says, God tells the children of Israel, I believe it's in Deuteronomy. He tells them, he says, I will put the dread and the fear of you in your enemy's heart, and he said, you will possess the land from the river to the sea. So it's very ironic. I mean, the devil is going to try to echo the same words, and when you really get down to it, it's all smoke and mirrors. And see, when we go back, and this is why that I'm saying that it's so important, because God tells Abraham, he says, what they do to you, I'll do to them. And I've mentioned this on here before. When you go back and you look at Iran was formerly Persia, and Persia, the king of Persia allowed Israel to go back, but he allowed only a segment to go back and to occupy. And many people say it was because of political reasons. Maybe it was, but he allowed it. So when you look at Iran now, and of course Iran changed their name because it means land of the Aryan. They changed it because they wanted to form an alliance with Hitler. And they wanted to let everybody know that they were allies of Hitler, and so they called themselves, they changed it to Iran, and so you have that situation there, but when you look at it, exactly what Persia did to Israel is exactly where Iran finds themselves today. They are just a small segment of their former glory. And America understood that. And while America does not show up in Bible prophecy, we have still played a key role in Bible prophecy from our founding. I mean, our founding in 1776, and the fact that we were founded on Judeo-Christian principles shows that, I mean, the Puritans understood what covenant with God meant. Why? Because they understood the Bible, they understood the covenant that God made with Israel, and therefore they wanted to make a covenant with God. And so they make this covenant, and part of that covenant is that they would do things to try and see to it that Israel would once again occupy their land. And so we find that all the way going back to even George Washington, the first president of the United States. He understood the importance of having an Israel in the Middle East. And, and so it's there.
Well, so something that I think many people fail to contend with is not only God's support for Israel, but if we don't have Israel in the Middle East, we have no other allies. Yes, we like to get oil from those countries, but beyond that, there is no meaningful relationship. And it's just like the relationship with China. They'll turn on you the second they see an opportunity. If you look at a majority of our terrorist attacks in the last, say, 40 years, it's almost exclusively from the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, and I will tell you, one of the things that our founders, that they were dead set against getting involved in European wars and even in wars over there, because they understood that that was a place where people went and countries went there and just got bogged down. I mean, even going back that far back, I mean, you had Rome to look at. You had all these other countries, England. You had all these countries to go look at and borrow from and go, hey, historically, this has not worked out for anyone.
Yeah. Well, once again, there's many examples of that in history. If you look at invading Russia, Napoleon tried it, didn't work, and then Hitler tried it, didn't work. It's very difficult to invade a country where the people are willing to, just like Japan, which is why I'm kind of getting sidetracked, but that's why we dropped 2 atomic bombs, is because we knew that Japan would not capitulate.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a people who are dead set and they're dug in, Afghanistan, we fought there for 20 years. Look at the Russians were there for how long?
Oh man, they were there for over a decade.
Yeah. And you're talking about guys with very simple technology. They don't have fighter jets. They don't have modern tanks.
Well, they do now.
Well,
after our withdrawal from Afghanistan.
We left them a bunch of stuff, but a determined foe can really, really bog you down. And then one that has God's backing, there's no chance.
Well, that's right. And so, you look at certain things, and of course, the scripture I'm kind of looking for is where God it's the conquest of Canaan. And God tells them, he says, and I will set your border from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines and from the wilderness to the Euphrates. And so, God is letting them know, I'm going to protect you. And this is why that is so important for the United States to understand what that means. And because I mean, we can go back. I mean, even, like I said, while America does not show up in Bible prophecy, there are things that we absolutely play a key role in. And when America's founded, the Enlightenment age is at its height. I mean, it's kind of it kind of wanes away in the early 1800s, but the industrial age is there. The Enlightenment period is there. And the Enlightenment period, see, this is what people don't understand about the United States. It wasn't that we were just formed. I mean, we we didn't just come to this country and say we're going to be a Christian nation. The founders looked at all of these different philosophies. They looked at all of these different they looked at all of these different ideologies, and they formed their belief system accordingly. Like I said, I mean, you had the you had the Enlightenment period going on. This is why that Jonathan Edwards would frame the message and preach it, sinners in the hands of an angry God, because the majority of people at that time during the Enlightenment period, what you had, some secularists would try to say that Enlightenment period was completely and totally atheist. They weren't. They Many of them were agnostic, and agnosticism is not something that you hear so much about. What an agnostic is, if you don't understand that term, an agnostic is someone who uh, believes that God may very well exist, but he's on the margins of life. He's on the margins of how things are going in the world in a person's specific life. This is where you get the term, actually, and this is why as a Christian you need to be careful and not use this term. It is, if God doesn't intervene. You have to understand God's always intervening. God's always right in the middle of it. That's why when people ask the question, where was God in the middle of all this? Well, he's right there in the middle of all of it. Things don't always go our way. They just don't. We live in a fallen world, but that doesn't mean God is not working and he's not existing. And because of messages like this is the reason why that guys like, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson, or it was Benjamin Franklin, who said that the longer I live, the more I understand that God's, I see the hand of God's providence in the dealings of man. And of course, I paraphrase that. But it was because of messages like sinners in the hands of an angry God, because that's what Jonathan Edwards is addressing. He's addressing the fact that God's not on the margins of life. He's right in the middle of it.
Well, so something that I'm not sure a lot of people are aware. So the average age of someone who signed the Declaration of Independence was 44.
Yeah.
But there were many of them who were young. So I pulled up a list here. Ages of the founding fathers on July 4th, 1776. James Monroe was 18 years old.
Yeah.
Aaron Burr was 20. Alexander Hamilton was 21. James Madison was 25. Thomas Jefferson was 33. John Adams was 40. Paul Revere was 41. And George Washington was 44. But I mean, can you imagine drafting a document and being a part of something at 18 years old? If you look at people now, at 18 years old, you're likely living at home. You haven't finished school. Well, I would hazard to say that a majority of the people in the current generation can't even think for themselves. At 18, they're not capable of drafting a document.
Right.
That I truly believe that, obviously it's not scripture, but it was divinely inspired. I mean, those. How do you get a group of guys that are that intelligent to sit down and come up with something?
As I said here before, Benjamin Franklin, when he would, before he would swear anyone into any kind of civil office, he would make certain that, number one, they had to take a test on their biblical knowledge, Old and New Testament, and they had to swear a belief in it. Maybe they didn't live by it, but they believed in it. I would say this to anyone who's listening to us: if you're 18 and you're not doing anything of that nature, don't worry about that so much. Because number one, back then, I mean, people didn't live to be as old as they do now. As they say, the new 40s, the new 20, something like that, right? I think it's a bearing though on our culture, where how much we have allowed ourselves to be dumbed down. The average person back then was living to be 50. So those guys that were 44, they had just maybe another 8 to 10 years to live before they died. Which is, on a side note, which is why that when Social Security was invented, the average person was living to be 62 to 65. Most of them were dying no. They were dying in their late 50s even then, and this is in the 1940s. And they were living to be late 50s at about the highest age. And so they set, I think at that time you could the average. No, let me back that up. The average male lived to be 62, and the average female lived to be 67 or 68. That's what it was. And I think Social Security, you could get it at, was it 62, I believe?
When they were just like what they're doing now, they try to put it at the cusp of where you work your entire life, you contribute into something that you'll never get the reward from.
Yeah, the government just thought they had this pile of money sitting over in the corner that they were going to be able to use.
Oh yeah, well, and so I don't kind of segue that in. I don't know if you saw, they're now saying that, of course they say this all the time, but by 2035, there will be no money in Social Security. There will be more people collecting than contributing, and there won't be enough money.
Well, and that's why, I mean, I was not a big fan of George W. Bush or his dad. But there were some things that he did during his administration that I supported. And one of them was, he was really pushing for Social Security to be defunded and people written checks for what they would get.
Well, so here's the flip side. If we don't have Social Security, but you pay into an investment account, you'll have far more money based off of your contribution by the time you're ready to retire. I think they said the average American, if they did something similar, would have $6 million when they retired, as opposed to Social Security, eking out what a thousand something.
Well, I mean, it's people lived better under pensions.
Yes, it's pathetic how much I right now, because of my condition, I'm on Social Security, and I get a whopping $857 a month. I mean, it's pathetic.
Well, okay, so is that your pension or Social Security?
That's Social Security.
So, O.J. Simpson, who died, 2-3 weeks ago now?
Yeah.
He even, he moved everything down to Florida. Reason being is that so when you move to California or Florida, the state of California or no other state, the federal government could not seize any of his assets while in Florida. That's why he moved down there. Because if you remember, he was acquitted in court for the murder of Nicole Brown and Nicole, and I can't remember her friend's name now. But he was acquitted in that. But when it came to the civil trial, their families were awarded so many millions that it was going to break OJ. And so OJ moves all of his assets and everything to Florida where they couldn't be touched. And so he did that to save what he had left. But even if he had not done that, he collected his pension from the NFL till the day he died. And if you look at what he was getting from his pension from the NFL, I mean, he was living better than the majority of Americans are today. Of course, I know some people would say, well, that had to do with the fact that he still had money left. But the pension plan was better than Social Security. Social Security is really just a Ponzi scheme. That's all it is. When you break it down, I mean, it's. I was talking this with a guy last week. When you look at Social Security, you're just paying for the next generation ahead of you. And that's why that they're saying it's going to be broken in 2035, because a lot of the younger people are not going to work. Many of them are not going to college. I say this and I believe this. If you want to make it to really be something in our culture today, and this is sad, I don't say this braggingly, just show up and try, and you'll do it. You'll make something of yourself, because companies are just looking for people who will just be there. Show up, go to work, show up, try. That's it. That's all you got to do.
Yeah. If you put forth in today's workforce, if you go, you do your job well, and you just simply show up, you will get promoted. You'll work your way up. There are so many people now who want to get paid, but not to do anything.
Yeah.
They want a paycheck, but they don't want to have to work for it. It doesn't matter if you're doing, okay, so My very first job was at Wendy's,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember getting in trouble for taking too long to wash the dishes because they actually had a large, like, industrial sink. And I
Yep.
would sit there and scrub them, and they would go, just run the sponge over it, rinse it off, and I'm like, but it's not clean.
That's really disgusting.
Um,
Not that you say that. I'm
but-
just saying if you're eating lunch at Wendy's right now while listening to this podcast, there you go.
I could tell you much more horrific stories that would deter you from ever eating them. But you know, the culture has embraced this idea that we should just have money, and that somebody owes us for something.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who you are. They should pay for my college. They should pay for this. They should pay for that. You have to go out and apply yourself.
Yeah.
But if you do so, you will work your way up.
Yeah.
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
Because there's a multitude of people who go to work, don't apply themselves, don't show up on time, or just no call, no show.
Right.
Or just quit out of the blue.
They silent quit.
Yes. And
you know what that is? Silent quitting?
yes, where they just don't show up. You don't.
No, that's ghosting.
Huh.
So silent quitting is where they show up and they do less and less each day they're there. So like they may start off and they may be doing all this, like a really good job, and then all of a sudden, they're doing only what is required of them. If you ask them to go do something else, they're not going to do it. I actually listened to, I was listening to a podcast this was probably about a year or two ago. It was Tim Pool's podcast, and they had someone talking about the fact that they had someone talking about the fact of doing these. I guess they call the gig economy. Yeah, that's what it's called. Which is where you're doing like jobs for Uber and different things of that nature. And he was saying that, which I don't disagree with this. The workforce is probably going to get to the point where that you hire somebody to do a job. You no longer have an employee that works 8 hours. So it's like you hire somebody and you say, hey, this job is going to take 2 hours to do. If you get it done in an hour and 45 minutes, you go home 15 minutes early, but the job is done. Because the 40-hour work week is starting to, I don't know if that's good or bad. See, that's my question. That's like the whole thing with the whole college thing. I'm on the fence about that. We obviously need college for some things, right? I mean, you doctors, I think engineers, and it could be questionable about some things like engineers, in that, you go to a school where they actually just teach you how to do that job. And it would be the same thing with a doctor.
So
Right? You just go.
I'm more in favor of trade schools.
I am too.
If my children want to go to college, then I'd like them to have that opportunity.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to go to college.
Yeah.
However, as an adult, so when I went to college, we were all sold this lie that you could get a degree in anything. It didn't matter what it was.
I was just thinking about this on the way here.
What it was, and you would be able to get a decent, job. You'd come out making a decent amount of money. That's an outright lie.
Well, they would set you down in a classroom and show you what you were going to make, as opposed to your peer who did not go to college.
And that's the biggest farce,
Uh-huh.
because I guarantee you, I don't know any personally, but if I had grown up with someone who went and worked in the oil field, or they were an electrician or a plumber,
They're making more money than you
I
are.
promise you they made more money
Yeah.
than I did.
Yeah.
And now I'll end up in professions that are not known for making a lot of money.
Yeah.
Like policing.
Yeah.
Like police.
But you know that going into it.
Yes. And my degree got me a whopping like $1,200 a year more. Woo,
That moves the needle nowhere.
Exactly. So you distribute that. It's like $100 a month.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
After taxes, you can go to one nice dinner a month
Well,
for your college degree.
Yeah.
So originally, when I was younger, I wasn't 100% convinced. I knew what I wanted to do with my life.
Right.
And so originally, when I obtained my degree, I originally was an English major.
Mm-hmm.
I decided that literature, especially poetry and stuff, was not for me.
Right.
So I switched majors to history, which once again is a degree that in the job market doesn't really get you very far.
It's weird what a history degree can do for you. Of course, I also have a history degree, so we got to defend it a little bit. If you enjoy doing research, it actually can help you out. I would say this, okay, in a defense of having a degree, and in a defense of it, going to college, I would say this is where they tell you the truth. It shows the ability to discipline yourself. However, the biggest show of discipline is be a success. And I would say here's where I think that a lot of the younger generation is going to start to kind of swing the pendulum back in another direction. They are getting married and buying a house as opposed to getting the student loan. I heard a woman last week or the week before, and she was on radio, and she's like 20, early, like 19, 20, something like that. And she said, why would my generation want to go to college? Because we've seen the older generations just, the lending institutions turning them into indentured servants. And while I believe that everyone, if you've made the student loan, you need to pay it, I do believe something needs to be done about the interest rate that's attached to it.
Well, so here's the thing. If you're young and you're or older and you're considering going to college,
yeah,
one thing I would hazard, you need to look at how concentrated is the field in which I'm looking to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for instance, when I was obtaining my history degree, I had a history professor sit us down, and he said there are so many universities across the nation, and they have this many positions open for people with history degrees. And it was
not that many.
It was like 300 and something across the nation.
That's not a lot.
And he said, think about all of you are history majors,
mm-hmm.
and this is just one college campus. You're vying for spots that
you wouldn't think that, but there, yeah.
But I once again, my grandmother helped put me through college, so I came out with no debt. However, you look at the multitude of people that are going into competitive fields where there's a small pool of jobs.
Yeah.
And you're running up an exorbitant amount of debt.
Yeah.
On the off chance that you may or may not get lucky.
Right.
Life is to some extent, when you do things, it's kind of a gamble.
Mm-hmm.
You pray about it. You do what you can do, and you roll with the punches.
Yep.
But you can also be intelligent about the decisions you make.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, look at the amount of debt you're going to go into and the probability of finding a good job, because just because you have a college degree doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean you're guaranteed a job. And if you look at the number of college graduates that are working menial jobs, it's expanded exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's just simply not enough space for those that got those degrees.
Right.
Like you got to really think about. I do like a cost analysis on everything.
Mm-hmm.
This is a totally different topic, but we were looking at going to SeaWorld when we go down to San Antonio.
Right.
And we were like, well, would it be cheaper to buy a season pass and then go several days, or would it be cheaper to plan it out and buy the tickets in advance? I'm looking at what is the most beneficial cost-wise, and you have to do that and especially something as large as student loans and college debt. You got people coming out of school with $250,000 in debt. Like
they'll never get that paid off.
No, and it doesn't matter how, even if you're making six figures, you have to think, you still have to have somewhere to live. You have to have a vehicle. You have to have all these other things. I mean, how much money can, and not to say that people can't do it, but um, I just don't think it's the right decision for a lot of people. And they get themselves in a predicament. And then, by the time it's all said and done, when they realize, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that, it's too late. Um, you can't map every facet of your life out, but it's good to sit down and look at it and go, okay, realistically, what are the odds? If I do this, am I going to get a job? And then, like I said, that I was sold this bill that I would come out and I'd be making, so much money.
Yeah.
And that's just,
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, even if you do make the amount of money that they've told you you're going to make, it's all going in student loan debt. And, it was Elon Musk who said, we have all these, a kid cannot go and get a, a kid cannot go and get um, a small business loan for say $10,000 or $15,000. Because I think like I've heard, I don't know this to be sure, but I think like Chick-fil-A has one of the lowest amounts of buy-in, but they're one of the hardest to get into. But their buy-in to be able to get into a franchise is low. And I think one of the reasons why it's so low is because even though you do it, you may not get it. And you don't get to pick and choose where you want to be. And what I'm saying is that kind of like what we talked about last week, I am more of the opinion of get married young, have your babies, buy a house, build equity, invest in the community that you live in, divest of yourself in that community. See, we're talking about when people went to college. I mean, when we were kids sitting in college, we were students and we were being told all this stuff. I don't know as the teachers who were telling us this stuff. I know none of the ones I had were, but I know, I wouldn't say that the majority of them were doing it for maniacal purposes of, trying to ruin that kid's life or make that kid a better, worker of the state, as the old Soviet Union used to say. But I will tell you, the higher education systems did do that, and they are no longer institutions of education; they are institutions of indoctrination.
absolutely. And they have become money making schemes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You get these quote unquote institutions of higher learning,
Yeah.
and they jack the price up because of the name that's attached. Um, the quality of education has really slumped because, for instance, um, I know quite a few people who are younger than me, and we would discuss topics, and they're like, "I never learned that." Like, what did you actually learn? I just felt,
Yeah.
and I had a multitude of classes, even when I went to college, where they weren't politically based,
Mm-hmm.
and they would bring politics into it.
Right.
It's become a platform for certain people to spread
That's exactly right.
their beliefs and try to force it down your throat.
Mm-hmm.
And what a lot of college students are afraid of is that if I uh, dissent or I have a disagreement with the teacher, it will negatively affect my grade.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, that may be true. And so they regurgitate the nonsense that they're fed.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it seems to stick with with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um, it's stifled a lot of conversation and just sitting down and having a differing opinion, but being rational and having a calm discourse. Because
Yeah.
now if you disagree, you're stifled, and that's the end of it.
Well, I had a conversation earlier in the week with a gentleman. He was probably, I'm gonna say, I know he's in his 50s. He's in his mid to late 50s, maybe even early 60s, and he's more of a left leaning guy. Um, and then there was this woman who was sitting in that area, and she's probably in her 20s. Been out of college all of 2 years. Now, the other gentleman, he was also college educated, and he's done quite well for himself over the years in business. The lady, she was, she's just starting her career out, and she's actually a nice person. But me and this gentleman got to talking about the 80s and the extravagance. Everybody wants to point to the extravagance of the 1980s and the Ronald Reagan administration and trickle down economics. And that's where he went to. And, he and I were having a discussion, and we disagreed, but we disagreed. It wasn't anything that was, there was no shots across the bow or anything like that. It was just a disagreement. The way that the old discussions used to be able to be had between somebody who leans left and maybe one who leans right. He and I no sooner get into this conversation till she gets up and she leaves. Just leaves the table. She doesn't even bother to try to put in, an opinion. And that's what they're, that is what they're being taught is don't engage. Just don't engage. Don't listen.
Well, I think that is a tactic that is being applied to stifle their ability to think for themselves.
Absolutely.
Okay, this whole I need a safe space or now it's come down to if you say something that they disagree with, you're assaulting me.
Yeah.
Like, do what now? Like, it's lunacy.
Yeah.
But I think that has really been pushed because then you can't have a rational conversation with someone who operates that way.
Right.
Like they're instantly shutting off. Like they don't even take the time to listen to what you're saying and rationalize it.
Yeah.
It's just boop. This doesn't match what I've been told or what I've been fed, and I'm out.
And you're going, and that's why I say low information, because they are low on information. They don't bother to research anything. And what's really funny is when you do bring facts and evidence to the table, they say, well, that's just history revisionism. No, how about we say your side is also history revision, because I've got more facts on my side to say that it's not. I'll be honest, one of my whole reasons for getting the degree was because I knew that a lot of people, especially within our age group, and even those that are about 10 years younger than our age group, one of the first things they're going to say is, well, you obviously can't know what you're talking about because you don't have a degree. Well, I do have. So now that we've got that on the table, let's just go ahead and move on. But I do think, I sometimes I wonder, because I wonder, is maybe this younger generation not going to college is going to be the thing that's going to swing that pendulum back. I don't think college will go completely away. I think trade schools will become more popular. I think trade schools will become more common. But I think something needs to be done. One of George Washington's biggest regrets, one of his biggest things that caused him, he felt inferior was because he never had a college degree. He never graduated from university. He never did any of that. You had Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, all these guys who were highly educated. Washington wasn't. Most of your innovators and creators don't go to college because you can't learn that in college. You cannot learn creativity and innovation in college. They stifle that. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. College stifles that. I'm not saying college is bad. I'm not even saying people that go to college are not creative and innovative. But what college teaches you to do is think like the machine. That's why they push college so much, because they want to take away the creativity.
Well, there was that whole push of if you don't go to college, you are intellectually inferior.
Yeah.
Or some of the smartest people I've ever met never went to college.
Yeah.
College now has become more, it's just like any of the other schools, where elementary school, middle school, um, you learn the information and you regurgitate it. There's no actual
Yeah.
um, intelligence really required. There's no forward thinking.
No.
I'm not saying that there aren't college courses that could do that to you, but I have been in history of early modern England, for example. The most monotonous John, like King John, King Edward, King blah blah blah. It's just regurgitate who took the throne and whatever. It there was no thinking involved. It was just memorizing some stuff.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Ain't getting out.
What you realize after you've been in college is that you're just relearning what you learned 4 or 5 years earlier in high school or in junior high or whatever it was. You go, wait a minute, I've already learned this. Why am I doing this again? And that's it, because it's just it does not innovation and creativity cannot be taught.
Well, so in high school, I was in all of the advanced classes.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I found was I was doing homework until midnight.
Mm-hmm.
But so let's say in the regular mathematics course, you would do all of the odd equations. All they were doing in the AP class was giving you odds and evens.
Yeah.
They were just doubling your workload.
Right.
They weren't actually learning anything beyond what the regular class was learning. They were just increasing the amount of work you had to do.
Yeah.
So eventually I dropped them all because I was in high school. I played basketball, and I was trying to keep my academics up, and like it just became such a hassle that I ended up dropping them. And when I went to talk to my mom about it, I told her, I said, all they're doing is giving me more work. I'm not actually learning anything.
No.
Now, I will give a shout out to the elementary school where I went. I went to Goliad Elementary in Odessa, Texas. They had what they called the Zenith program. I tested into it, I think in the second grade. My second grade teacher actually thought that she didn't think I was quote unquote gifted at all because I was so bored in her class, I couldn't focus.
Probably smarter than the class. That's what you find with a lot of people, because I work in the education system, and what you find with a lot of people that are really just what they like to call super active, they're just unruly and disobedient, is they're smarter than that class.
And they're being stifled.
Yes.
They're bored.
Yes.
And so what they did is my mom went and had me tested. I went to, I don't remember where they took me. They had me sit in a chair and they had a projector. And I had to work out the problem. I was administering a legitimate IQ test. And then the school had a test where, for instance, they would give you a squiggly line and you were supposed to draw something with it. And so I remember I made a king cobra and I put the little, I don't even know what it's called, but the markings on the hood of the cobra and like make sure to draw scales. And anyway, I apparently tested very high.
Yeah.
And so I was put into this program where they would pull me out of my regular classes and we would have puzzle problems or for instance, they had one that was a bridge, like an actual bridge over water, but the letters were all jumbled up. It's a bridge over troubled water. You had to figure out what the pictures meant.
Right.
They need more stuff like that.
They do.
The kids feel challenged and they're using their intellect. They're looking at something and trying to solve a problem, not just going in, looking at some monotonous junk and regurgitating it.
It goes against the agenda.
Oh yeah. Well, I've said this and I'll say it till the day I die. Ultimately, there are many people in power who want to stay in power simply by keeping the majority of people subservient. When when you start to look at things critically and you can question what's going on, and you gain a greater understanding of how the world operates and how humans manipulate each other,
Yeah.
You become a threat. And so they don't want that to happen.
No, and I mean, it goes back to that episode we did about a month or so ago. Why they're wanting people to move out of the rural areas, because the people in the rural areas typically they're there because they think more for themselves. They know how to live on the land. They know how to defend themselves. You know, they don't know they know how to fend for themselves, right? That's what you can't have. And that's what college doesn't teach. I'm not against college. If you're in college, by all means, if it's something you need to do, finish it. I'm not, like I said, I mean, you and I both have degrees. But what I'm saying is that don't look at it as your lifeline to living life, because I'm telling you, it wouldn't shock me in the next 5 to 8 years of a lot of the ideology that you and I have known is going to be gone. Because a lot of these guys are not, I mean, like a lot of these companies that are hiring people based on college degrees. I had a conversation last night with a friend of mine, and he works for a company, and we were kind of talking about how that he is not sure, like most of the jobs, the promotions that he gets, he doesn't need a college degree for. But he thinks that maybe some of the promotions he might. And I think a lot of companies are going to start moving back to that they don't need a college degree.
Well, we've moved away from, and I'll just say it, we've moved away from promoting the most qualified person.
Yeah.
We now look at, well, what is your ethnic background? What is your sex? How do you identify?
Which the Supreme Court did change that, by the way.
That's how they were promoting.
Yeah.
Instead of actually looking at who is the best fit, who is the most qualified, who is, my stepdad, for instance, is he's retired now, but was an electronic engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Never went to college. Super, super smart. Can do crazy math problems in his head.
Yeah.
He had a lot of trouble later on, not when he first started. One, because electronic engineers were kind of few and far between, so to speak.
So as long as you had the knowledge, you were going to get the job.
Would we say Einstein wasn't intelligent if he didn't go to college?
Yeah.
Like sometimes college, you're smarter than the professors.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are people like that.
Yeah.
But he caught a lot of flack for not having a degree. And there were several times where he had bosses that were placed ahead of him mm-hmm. because they had a degree but had no understanding of how to make the projects
work. So
get done.
They throw all the work off on him and pay him less.
Yeah. And that became an excuse for companies to stifle people who didn't go to college.
Well, and I think one of the draws to some people going to college is they just enjoy the ability to learn and garner the knowledge. And I think it was a beautiful mind.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
But
nothing wrong with that at all.
I genuinely enjoyed a majority of my time at college.
I did too.
And honestly, if I was in the position where I could go back, I wouldn't mind going back and taking some courses. I wish I could remember.
And that's one thing I wanted people. We're not knocking college here. That's not what this is about. It is simply saying never lose the ability to think for yourself.
Yes, and think about it rationally.
Yeah.
And financially, is it going to make sense in my particular case?
Yeah.
What do you want to do? Don't feel obligated to get a degree just because that's what people say you should do. Electricians are a good example of people who go to a trade school as opposed to college. Do we need electricians? Absolutely. Are there a whole lot of them? Yeah, I would hazard to say that you would be more likely to get hired as an electrician than you would if you got a run-of-the-mill business degree.
Yeah.
And probably make more money.
Well, I worked for an electric company last year that they had their own school. And of course, the way they paid, you had to go, it was a 4-year school. And the way you paid to go through that is they withheld so much of your paycheck.
But you're still getting paid.
Well, but here was the thing.
And you're learning a valuable skill.
Here was the thing, right? If you made it all the way through the 4 years, they reimbursed you.
That's even better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
because very few people do.
So, oh gosh, what's his name? Is it? I'm gonna probably get it wrong. He owns Virgin Airlines. Is it Richard Branson?
Richard Branson.
So he said that you should train people to where they can leave your job or your institution, but treat them well enough that they don't want to.
That's right.
And I think that's we've kind of lost sight of that.
Yeah.
You know, yes, is making a profit important? Yes, because if you don't, you'll go under.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the reality
Yeah.
of business. But let's not forget the value of humans and what they contribute.
That's right. If you have a happy employee, they're going to make your company a lot better.
But I mean, I think that's a heck of a deal to essentially get paid to go to school and then get reimbursed the money that you contributed if you complete it.
Yeah.
I mean, I would hazard that if more places did that, you would find employee satisfaction to be higher and to actually retain those employees.
Yeah.
People they simply want to feel valued.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And speaking of happy employees, we are going to wrap it up. So we got some happy employees here. We are going to wrap it up. This has been a great exchange. And again, always that's what the exchange is about. It's about bringing your thoughts and ideas. We talk about thinking for yourself. It is about bringing your thoughts and ideas. If you have questions, please join in. If you're listening to this, go ahead and type something in. We'll get back to your questions. We'll answer your questions. We want to hear them. We want to hear what your thoughts are. And as we are wrapping it up, Michael, what take us out, man?
Well, so like you said, we really need your participation. It's we have a good exchange, Thomas and I do, but we need you to interact as well. I'd like to see this be more of a community where we can go and have these discussions or come up with some new thoughts, figure out how each other think. Even if you have a differing opinion, maybe we can come to some common ground, or at least, if nothing else, kind of understand where the other person's coming from. But I will leave you with this week. Make rational decisions, not based off of what other people tell you should do. Yeah. Because you'll find yourself in a predicament. And the reality is, unfortunately, that a lot of people out there do not have your best interest in mind. Yeah. Do what is best for you. Do what's best financially, emotionally, spiritually. And sometimes that goes against the grain. Yeah. And you just have to be your own person.
Not only do we need them, we want them and we welcome them. So until next week, go with God, be blessed.